Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Friday, July 4th, 2025. And on Fridays, we talk about human behavior and justifications. Obviously, because it's July 4th, happy 4th of July to those of you celebrating in the United States. I'm obviously up here in Canada. And on the annual eve, then, of the 250th anniversary of the U.S. and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I'm reminded of some of the most famous words ever set to parchment. The second paragraph of that document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the one change I'd make, having grown up in the 20th century and now that we're in 2025, would be to switch the word men to people. That's the way it goes with historical language, right? But I'd write it, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And again, having grown up in the United States, I can say that I do, in fact, deeply believe in these words. I take their meaning quite literally. They're at the core of how I see myself. And yet, even as a youngster, I started to wonder if people everywhere really believed in these words. As I just learned basic U.S. history in school, it became quite evident to me that at least some of the founders and many of the people of the day didn't really mean that these words and rights should be extended to fully and equally to everyone. Certainly not to Native Americans or to the slaves or African Americans in general, to say nothing of the linguistic exclusion of women in the documents and their more limited roles in public life. And furthermore, like countries everywhere, the U.S. has always struggled with the issue of immigration and which groups should be privileged and admitted and in what numbers, and which should be excluded and on what basis. And that's obviously still the case today, all around the world. I've imagined that at some point, the wise political leadership in the U.S. and Canada and elsewhere, they must have been debating, at least privately, hey, we've got to have a better immigration policy than the Native Americans and the indigenous peoples of North America. Look what happened to them with that open border policy. And I'm sorry if you don't see the irony here. You're just not trying very hard. Okay, so what does any of this have to do then with improving the world? Be patient, I'll get there. When I was a child, I'd watch television and I'd see these occasional commercials and TV specials talking about world hunger and poverty. Made quite an impression on me. And there'd be these TV programs or news clips where they'd discuss some kind of international aid program, like World Vision. It was all the way back to the 1950s. And in fact, World Vision is one of the first charities that I ever donated to when I was a little bit older. So here's a brief clip then from the Today Show back in 1965.
Today, Dr. Pierce.
Thank you, Hugh.
A pleasure to have you here today to look at some of the film. We're going to show you a little more of the film later on that Dr. Pierce will narrate and explain to us. But let me ask you first, how you as a clergyman became involved there, and particularly as a war correspondent. That's a bit unusual.
Well, World Vision is an agency. It happens to be that we're a Christian agency, but we serve everyone. We're not out just to serve a particular sect. We want to be in the world what we think Jesus Christ would be if he were here in the middle of all these problems and needs.
Okay. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, and what was he saying even then, right? He was saying that World Vision is an agency. It happens to be that we're a Christian agency, but we serve everyone. We're not just out here to serve a particular sect. We want to be in the world what we think Jesus Christ would be if he were here in the middle of all these problems and needs. So, more than anything, though, I do recall watching the footage of the starving children that various international aid organizations would air on the television. And they'd be very similar to, and I'm just going to show you a simple clip from last year, which comes from Goodwill International. Well, here's their piece. And this is the sort of thing, like I said, I used to see quite often on television when I was growing up. Yeah. And almost invariably, I would see these, and the tears would just start running down my face. Um, the same thing would happen when they show footage of poor folks who are struggling, in the United States or from Appalachia to the inner cities. Have that same reaction. And in fact, I can remember to this day one of the songs that I used to see on the television when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and it's just seared in my memory. Right? So, and this is from one of those kind of commercials, right? Eating paint and plaster. I took him to the doctor. Convulsion, lead poisoning, the ghetto's malaria. Why, Lord, why? Something like that. So forgive me, I'm just like throwing it together. But yeah, unbelievably, I actually found a clip of the actual commercial. So yeah, let me see if I can pull that up real quick. You'll see this is the kind of thing that little Dr. J, little Joey was, come on here. There we go. I was looking at back in the day. Okay. Here we go.
Paint chips peeling from the ceiling by my baby's bed, eating paint and plaster. I took him to the doctor. Convulsions, lead poison, the ghetto malaria. Why, Lord, why? Landlord lazy, and I'm half crazy, 'cause my baby's dead. My baby's dead.
Can't even imagine. My baby's dead, right? So never a day goes by when I don't think about or feel for or pray for those who are struggling to survive in many instances. And I guess it's the combination of religious messaging that I heard, going to church and going to CCD each week, as well as my secular experiences, the messaging from the television. All of that compelled me to empathize with anybody who might be hurting or suffering. And all of which is to say, then, like everyone else, I had to face the reality of what was really happening in the world, or largely suppress the pain, or simply ignore the information about people suffering. And of course, I learned it was not just a simple binomial choice either. There's all kinds of nuance and complexity to how we think about and approach these issues in the world. But I know in my gut that even from the time I was a small child, that the right or the best decision was to try to help, try to improve the world in any way we could, if possible. And so in my case, I studied the social sciences and social work as an undergrad. I worked in the helping professions. I eventually became a professor. I did a lot of tutoring on the side with kids in school. I coached all kinds of young people in various sports from about the age of 19. And then, of course, as a young adult, I started contributing to the causes that I believed in and just tried to be a decent person, not always successfully. I certainly struggled too, right? I shared, well, I'm not going to go into any of my own personal details here, but suffice it to say that, I definitely struggled like so many others, right on, through my 20s and my 30s. And I didn't even get my permanent job until I was 41. So if you don't feel bad if you're 30 and you're still wondering why you haven't figured it all out yet. Sometimes it takes a while. And indeed, as I've mentioned previously here too, I only really kind of finally arrived in my mid 50s, and I'm still learning. So anyway, So what have I learned then about human behavior and justifications for moving in the direction of trying to help and to trying to improve the world? And what does that look like exactly? Can we actually be thoughtful and caring and even altruistic people, not just towards our immediate family or our loved ones, but can we embrace others as well? How far can we extend the circle of care? Only to our personal connections? Only to our specific ethnic or religious communities? Only to the people who are part of our tribe or part of our nation? What about the entire world? That seems difficult, daunting, if not impossible. So, as human beings, we're really good at fashioning philosophical explanations to justify why we should only why we should only help certain people or our kind. Now, someday I'll break that down in greater detail and why these arguments ultimately fall apart. But the fact remains that there's a real divide out there across the many tribes of the planet. In fact, most people have a specific identity and attachment, not just to their family, but to a certain kind of people, whether that involves ethno-racial or national identities. And so that's why we celebrate then the 4th of July in the United States and Canada Day on July 1st. We're expressing then our appreciation and our love for our national tribes, if you will. And we raise our flags and we sing our national anthems and much more. And yes, I know both anthems quite well. Again, I'm fluently bilingual in Canadian and American culture now, language. But one of the core beliefs that I've always held too about both of these countries is our commitment to the broader global community, if you will. That is through our multifaceted and often multilateral international aid and peace efforts. Yes, I know that our governments, especially the US, but Canada too from time to time, have been bad faith actors. But that's not the main story, in my view, of either country. Rather, I've always been inspired by the countless stories and statistics that have confirmed just how much we and our countries, and through our robust nonprofit sectors, have contributed aid and food and famine relief and healthcare and housing and access to potable water and so much more all over the world. And similarly, I'm inspired when we do these sorts of things at home too, on the domestic front. When we really invest in health and education and the well-being of our own more immediate populations. And so yes, I even feel a sense of pride when we do these things well. And by the way, these are not mutually exclusive. That is helping internationally and on the domestic front. They go hand in hand in my view. And again, speaking just for myself then, I feel a sense of pride when I've tried to improve the lives and helped out my immediate family and loved ones. And if I've done a good job at that, sure, I feel really good about that. That makes me happy. But I also feel a sense of pride when I feel like I've done well in my job, my teaching, or helping my students along their particular journeys, or whenever I've done a good job in coaching. And I feel a sense of pride when my politicians funnel our tax dollars in support of the public good, broadly defined, and when our governments and our international aid programs help people all over the world and save literally millions of lives. That makes me feel good. So yeah, I love what the Red Cross does, for example. I love what Doctors Without Borders has accomplished, and much more. But I'm also proud of the fact, for example, that here in Canada, we have Global Affairs Canada with a $7+ billion budget, and that we provide billions more in relief through other programs in terms of international aid and assistance. And we support climate financing assistance and programs that support biodiversity, among other things. And on a per capita basis, we actually even exceed the United States in terms of our relief efforts. Now, that said, the US has spent more than anyone else in the world in real dollars and over time since the Second World War. We not only assisted, obviously, with the rebuild following the Second World War, but in terms of the total spending on global relief efforts over the last 8 decades. And again, I think, we can all be proud of that fact. I certainly am. And yet that's starting to change, isn't it? At least in some respects. So the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, stated the following: as of July 1st, U.S. aid will officially cease to implement foreign assistance. Foreign assistance programs that align with administration policies and which advance American interest will be administered by the State Department, where they will be delivered with more accountability, strategy, and efficiency. End quote. And then on Canada Day, Rubio posted the following as well on Substack. Quote, this era of government-sanctioned inefficiency has officially come to an end. Under the Trump administration, we will finally have a foreign funding mission in America that prioritizes our national interests. End quote. Well, that's their prerogative, but it's difficult to find many thoughtful scientists or global leaders and so on who would agree with that sentiment. In fact, even former Presidents Bush and Obama teamed up to denounce the decision, with Bush being even more vocal. So former President Bush stated in part, is it in our national interest that 25 million people who would have died now live? I think it is, and so do you. And then he added, you've showed the great strength of America through your work, and that is your good heart. End quote. And I always thought that that's exactly where the U.S. was truly the world leader. Now, again, I know critics won't agree, and people in some other countries don't necessarily think that. But at least as I understood the issues in my naivete growing up, I always thought that, the U.S. and Canada, that we're the good guys. And I still genuinely believe that, right, for the most part, and that we'd always be there for people in need. So have we really changed that much? Is that who we still are in 2025? And if we have changed, what would be the consequences? Now, specifically with respect to USAID, again, this program that's just been shuttered, interestingly, and not coincidentally, on June 30th, Monday, they released a new study that was published in The Lancet, arguably the world's leading medical journal. And they produced 2 quite significant results with respect to USAID funding. So first, in terms of what it's accomplished. From 2000 to 2021, higher levels of U.S. aid funding, primarily directed toward low and middle income countries, especially African countries, were associated with a 15% reduction in age standardized all causes mortality and a 32% reduction in under age 5 mortality rates. So in other words, they're suggesting then the U.S. efforts have been incredibly successful, as more than 90 million lives were saved over that 21-year period. USAID funding was associated with a 65% reduction in mortality from HIV and AIDS. That's about 25 million deaths that were avoided. A 51% reduction in mortality from malaria. That's about 8 million deaths. And 50% from neglected tropical diseases, which is about 9 million deaths. And then significant decreases were also observed in terms of mortality from tuberculosis, nutritional deficiencies, diarrheal diseases, respiratory infections, and maternal and perinatal conditions. Okay, so that's on the one hand. And then second finding was a forecasting projection. All right, so they did these forecasting models that predicted that the current funding cuts could result in more than 14 million additional all-age deaths, including 4.5 million in children younger than the age of 5 by 2030. So in the next 5 years, they're suggesting then, or they're projecting based on the modeling, and again, this is not a fact, these are statistical modeling techniques that have been used, but they're suggesting then that this is going to potentially affect millions of people, or that upwards of 14 million people, including 4.5 million kids under 5, are going to lose their lives as a result of this decreased or cutting of the program funding. So the authors then argue that the effects of the funding cuts would be, quote, would be similar in scale to a global pandemic or a major armed conflict, end quote. Okay, so it's obviously your decision in terms of your politics as to, who and what kinds of programs you'd like to support, and so on. Just bear in mind that our behavior and our decisions always have real-world consequences. Our actions and our lack of actions have real-world consequences. So I'm just hoping with the Dr. J Vlog series and with what I promote and what I do for a living that your hearts still matter as much as your minds do, and that empathy still has an important place as part of the human condition in 2025 and beyond. And so that's why, as ever, I sign off. May you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And may you always have the courage to care. And I hope to see you tomorrow.